I am a murderer. I'm responsible for the deaths of 75 within 2 weeks. I've stabbed men to death, rendered bodies to ash, killed children in the womb, and even drowned whole ships at sea. I've changed the fate of kingdoms and seen to it that uncharted planets remained unfound. I would likely be the most prolific serial killer in the United States, if not for one problem. The police claim that if murdering fictional characters was a crime, they'd have to jail Stephen King and George R. for multiple life sentences. They say this as they laugh me out of the police station. They think it's a joke, or that maybe I'm not right in my head. But I can assure you, I'm as right as I've ever been. I listened to them tell their stories for years, and I've heard them scream when I end their lives. I'm a murderer, pure and simple, and their blood is on my hands. You're probably reading this, though, and thinking that I'm ready for the rubber room. Let me start from the beginning. I've always been a creative mind. When I was younger, I could hear them whisper to me about their homes, their verdant green kingdoms, their sterile, majestic spaceships, the feel of rolling decks beneath their feet, and so much more. It manifested in my games, and my school friends would always gather around to see what today's adventure would be. We traveled the cosmos, fought wars between elves and men, and roamed imaginary prairies as we hunted wrongdoers on horseback. As I grew older, the voices grew louder, more insistent, and their stories became my stories. I wrote about the kingdoms of my youth, the adventures of my childhood, and by the time I was 20, I had 5 books published, even one on the New York Times bestseller list. As I grew, so grew my fame. My writing was prolific, and all the while the voices told me their stories. I took my readers to fantastic places, and their patronage allowed me to live quite well. By the time I was 30, I had a home and a family and enough published work to fill a bookshelf. That's when the problems started. It all started with Aberdeen Price, dashing archaeologist adventure. He told me of his next adventure, a trip to the city of Bone. However, I was working on something else at the time, and didn't want to divert efforts away from my current project. So I wrote some notes and promised myself I would sit down and give him some time when I was done. This apparently wasn't good enough for Aberdeen. He came every night in my dreams and told me his story over and over and over again, until finally, I just couldn't take it anymore. I stopped what I was doing and diverted all my attention to writing his next book. It was a hit, a bestseller, and the biggest mistake of my life. You see, this showed the voices that they could get what they wanted by badgering me. Every night from that night on, they would come to me and tell me their stories, each overlapping the other, until I just couldn't take it anymore. The kingdom of Verdant Green was once at the mercy of the dark wizard Zormuth. His evil armies threatened to... Scanners once more alert Kevin Gorel that he is nearing his destination. The dark planet Zephyr rises from the darkness of space as he see the island of Katmandil off the starboard side of Elizabeth's Folly. The shore is quiet, but Captain Cree can once again see the natives amongst the trees as he hears his quarry. The elusive Dr. Burton will strike again this night, and I will be ready to... Their voices towered in my mind like the screams of children as they tried to make themselves heard. That was my first mental breakdown, and my worst. My wife arrived home in time to save me from bleeding to death. They put me in an institution for 3 weeks after that. Lisa thought it was all the strain of my busy writing schedule. The strain of writing so much must have just become too much for you, she said, as she stood by my bedside and looked down with pity for her poor, brilliant husband. She had no idea. The worst part wasn't the IVs or the sedatives, the shitty TV, or the staying in a room for 24 hours a day, the sounds of sorrow from down the hall, even the constant itching from the healing cuts on my arms. It was the week and a half I spent with my hands in restraints. Without my hands, I couldn't write. Without writing, there was no way to stop the shrieking harpies in my brain from driving me insane. It took me a while to convince them that writing was a kind of therapy for me. The battle was made all the harder by my wife's constant arguments about how the writing had put me here in the first place. After a week and a half of no change, they had begun to see that I might be making some sense. I began to write again, and the changes were noticeable. I started sleeping, became less hostile, finished my meals, and a month later I was ready to go home. The voices started ramping up again almost immediately. By this point in my career, I had 7 stories running on and off. That's a lot of voices trying to be heard. I tried to keep up with them, but I could feel my sanity slipping again as they screamed for my attention day and night. By my 2nd week home, my wife was ready to have me committed all over again. I'd stop sleeping and would lock myself in my study for days to make the voices stop for even a few minutes. That was when my first murder took place. That's not to say that no one had ever died in my stories. Characters die in stories, that's the nature of storytelling. But this was the first time I'd ever deviated from the path set forward by the voices. Detective Sam Umbridge was coming to the climactic end of his latest crime novel, and the shootout with the killer was becoming heated. I had meant to write that Dario West, the antagonist of the novel, was struck by Sam's bullet as he leaned around the doorframe. Before I knew what I'd done, though, I had written the death of beloved gumshoe Sam Umbridge instead. I had moved on to the next sentence before I caught my error, but it was too late by then. He died in my head with a gut-wrenching scream, and just like that, his voice was mercifully silent. For a moment, all the voices were silent. It was as though they had all seen what I had done in my manic state. I cleaned up the draft a little bit before sending it off. Sam and Dario had killed each other in the shootout, and Sam had died victorious. Fans hated that Detective Sam Umbridge would never make another appearance on their shelves, but they accepted it. The end was widely praised by fans and critics alike, an all-around success. My agent even called to congratulate me on the climax of a much-beloved series, and asked if everything was going all right with me. Last time we talked, you sounded as though you were a little shell-shocked. I guess I wasn't shocked now that I think of it. The process really made me think. Why not kill what was driving me crazy? I didn't have to kill them all, just enough of them to make the voices quiet down a little. Like any prolific serial killer will tell you, it's hard to stop once you've started. Before I quite realized what I'd done, I'd ended them all. I ended my 8-book fantasy series with the death of the entire court and the eventual fall of the protagonist in his order. I watched as Kelvern Gorel flew his ship and crew into the phantom night where certain doom awaited, and he would never be heard from again. After sinking the ship of his arch-rival, I had the Spanish Armada sink Elizabeth's Folly with all hands aboard, while Captain Cree floated atop the waves after taking a sword to the belly. I dropped a tomb on the head of Aberdeen Price, the one who had started my descent, and made the ruins he was exploring his own tomb in turn. I killed them all, one by one, and the fans were livid. How could you just kill them? Why wouldn't you simply end the series on a high note? Why did they all have to die? I toyed with the idea of ending their series, but I knew that it wouldn't work the moment I thought of it. They were never my stories in the end. They were only my stories to tell. If I left them alive, they would always want one more adventure. Killing them was all I could do to stop my descent into madness, and as I lay down to sleep that night, I felt myself smile at the thought of my long-awaited sleep. It never came. I've been staring at my sleeping wife for the past 7 hours as I keep court with the whispering dead. Their spirits are unwilling to die, the part of my soul I put inside them reluctant to be put to rest. It's only now that I see the folly of my actions. The dead, you see, are not to be satiated with adventures or the continuing joy of existence. They moan, they wail, they bemoan the lives and the loves that were taken from them. At first, it was only for me that I wept. Now I see that this curse won't end with me. You see, I was watching my daughter as she played in the park yesterday. She played in the sandbox, her dolls and her brother's action figures out on an adventure of her own creation. I watched her going about her games of make-believe as I sat in a daze. When I asked her about it over lunch, she told me a story about knights and castles, people hunting for dragons, and brave warriors protecting those in need from harm. It was a story just like the ones I had made up as a kid. The kingdom was similar to the one I had left in ashes. I beg you, anyone out there who hears the whispers, don't pass the gift to others. It must end with us, and never darken the mind again. I must keep my own vigil now. I must watch my own daughter now, before the madness takes hold. I can't let the whispers have her too, even if it means the death of another of my creations. I won't let the madness have her.
I hadn't wanted to go to Applebee's, but my friends insisted. I'm not opposed to going out for a meal, but I hate going to Applebee's in our town. It's a gathering place for every half-drunk Chad and happy-hour drunk who doesn't have enough money to drink at the yacht club, but has too much class to go to the Tilted Stool. We aren't big drinkers. I mean, we like to tie on a few sometimes, but these guys get downright sloppy. We get a booth as far from the bar as we can, and it's still so damn noisy in there. By the end of the night, we're all yelling at each other just to be heard over the jukebox or the drunks. I spend the rest of the night with my eardrums pounding and my head ready to crack open. At least that's how it's always been until tonight. So, we're in the bag booth, like always, when I see the guy. Mark was talking about some girl he was seeing from work, Frank laughing like a donkey. His latest drink bounced around, threatening to spill as he pounded the table, and I looked up from my cowboy burger, just in time to see this guy hunkered over his food at the end of the row. He was bent over his plate, top of his bald head gleaming, and the light overhead lit him like a wax sculpture. I'm not usually one for people watching, but this guy kind of stood out. He reminded me of a story from Temple, back when I still went with my parents. They told us a story about a guy who'd built a creature to get revenge, a golem, and that was my first thought when I saw this guy. That sounds a little harsh, but I only mean he appeared not like a man, more like the approximation of a man. He had a white button-up, a red tie hanging loose around his neck, and even from here I could see the sweat starting to pool under his arms. Despite the noise, I could hear him almost perfectly, too. At first, I thought he was eating his meal real loudly, bent over at the waist like a dog. But the longer I watched, the more I thought he might be crying. His shoulders were hitching in slow up and down jerks, and he appeared to be sobbing into his plate. I felt a little voyeuristic as I watched him. Poor guy was probably living what was the worst day of his life. He'd probably been stood up for a date or lost his mom, and here I was just watching. When Mark nearly leaned into my ear, I jumped a little when he spoke. "What you looking at, Pally?" He followed my line of sight and found the poor guy before I could. Whew! That's a guy who's got a date with a rope later. Frank turned to look, but winced as Mark kicked him. "Don't look! Ain't you got no sense?" Poor fella. Kinda looks like this guy that came into the gas station the other night. He comes in high as a kite, and when I wouldn't sell him beer, he just starts crying, and Mark went on, but I wasn't really paying any attention anymore. I felt a little bad for continuing to watch him, but I just couldn't turn away. Something about him was mesmerizing. It was like driving past a car crash and being unable to stop staring at the bodies on the pavement. You know it's wrong to stare, but you just can't stop. Frank was braying laughter again, and I could see our waitress contemplating whether to cut him off or not as she came to get our plates. Mark told her he was fine, and Frank ordered another beer. And after several tense seconds and an elbow from Mark, I snapped back to myself and said I was okay too. "Geez, buddy," Mark said as the waitress shuffled off. "You gonna go over and propose?" "What are you talking about?" I asked, biting into my burger and realizing it was about lukewarm. Had I really been staring at that poor guy as my burger turned to ice? "You've been staring at him for like 10 minutes. Thought you were going to order him a drink for a minute." We all laughed, mine being a little forced, and then Mark stood up and waved to a pair coming through the door. Jim and his wife Celine waved at us in turn, and Frank moved our side of the table so the two lovebirds could sit together. They'd been inseparable since college, and I don't think I'd ever seen one without the other more than a handful of times. They excused their lateness. Their sitter had been late, and Jim started in on a story about how she had gotten lost and turned down the wrong road, when I turned my attention back to the poor guy 2 booths down. He was still bent over his burger, still quietly sobbing, but the way his shoulders moved had started to seem wrong. I was no expert on sobbing, but this guy's herky-jerky movements were starting to look like something else. A rational part of me chastised myself for continuing to stare at this poor guy, but I was like a moth to flame now. He was my car wreck, and I was starting to notice signs of foul play. When he snorted loudly, I heard the laughter for the first time. It made me shiver a little as I heard it thrum into me like a badly played piano note. The guy wasn't crying. He was laughing. The more I looked, the more I could see bits of meat and lettuce sprayed over the tabletop. The longer I looked, the more I wondered how I'd misunderstood his laughter for crying. I was now drawn deeper into this web of strangeness. No escape in sight. Crying was one thing. I could understand crying, but who sits in a booth by themselves and laughs? Was he nuts? Some kind of mental case who was off his meds? Watching him from behind Selena's shoulder, I wondered if he might be dangerous. Maybe we should leave. Maybe I should suggest that we change venues, but all thought of escaping fled from me as he lifted his head from that plate. The scream that welled up inside me was cut off by my constricted throat and likely sounded like nothing so much as a sigh. The man's face looked like a fantastic bit of prosthesis. It was like a piece of Halloween decoration that's just a little too realistic. The kind you worry might contain a person who wants to bite. His face looked like the front of a thumb, calloused and rippled with wrinkles or ridges. His eyes were like colorless slits, something slashed into his face with a knife. His nose appeared to be drawn on, like a cartoon character's. He was unreal, something that shouldn't exist in polite society outside of a circus tent. His mouth, though, his mouth was the worst. His mouth was full of long, needle-like teeth, reminding me of an anglerfish as it protruded from his thin lips. Those teeth looked like they would never close comfortably. From here, it looked like they would constantly poke at your lips and gums, and you would be in agony most of the time. There were pieces of meat on those teeth, red raw chunks that had been speared by them, and that's when I looked down at the plate. It was covered in the grisly remains of what looked like chunks of raw hamburger meat. I doubted like hell that the staff had just handed this guy raw beef, but the alternative seemed even wilder. The alternative was that this man had brought his own raw meat from home so he could just consume it here in public. As the horror ran through me like ice water, I looked up to see those colorless slits observing me. The two of us just stared at each other for a count of 5. Then he pulled those thin lips and monstrous teeth into a smile, and I could see red pooling at the edges of his flesh. I glanced over at Mark and Frank, both now sitting on my side of the booth, but neither of them had noticed him. The 4 of them were involved in a conversation like there wasn't a monster sitting 12 feet from us. It seemed impossible that anyone could be having a normal conversation so close to that creature. Its very presence should have triggered some ancient primal node deep in our brains and forced us to either destroy it or flee from it. The 4 of them were talking about jobs and school and Jim and Celine's daughter, while this thing got to exist in humanity with the rest of us. It was It was too much to handle. Suddenly I wanted out. I wanted to be anywhere but there. I tried to tap on Mark to get him to move or to look up or just acknowledge that I was losing my mind within easy reach of him. But my body wouldn't respond. I managed to flick my fingers at his arm, bumping him a little, but he only rubbed a hand over it as if a bug had landed on him. Serene was talking about the new Pokemon game, and Mark and Frank were just nerdy enough and broke enough to be enraptured by her descriptions. I was stuck in a state of eye contact with that thing, and the longer I looked, the more it seemed to drink me in with those strange eyes. Then, without warning, it began to sink down in its seat, becoming lost beneath its table. I panicked. Suddenly not being able to see it was worse than having it on display. Could it sink beneath our table? How far could it go? How close could it get? I was suddenly imagining the damage those teeth could do to a foot, even a foot within a shoe, and I pulled mine up a little higher as Selena's words washed over me. He didn't resurface for quite some time, and you would have said that such a thing would not have gone unnoticed. Then he slid back up from under the table on the opposite side of the booth. He was grinning from ghastly ear to ear, and he looked like a little kid who's trying to play with the table behind them. There was still a table between us and him, but I was no longer sure how much protection that provided us. I didn't know his mental state, and whether he meant to do us harm or not, but when he dipped back down again, I started shaking. "What's wrong with you?" Mark asked suddenly, turning to look at me as I shuddered beside him. I pointed to the empty plate where the man had been sitting, and Mark looked over before scoffing loudly. "Oh no, your boyfriend left. Don't worry, I'm sure most of those guys at the bar will take you home if you ask them nicely enough." "What's going on?" Jim asked, noticing my discomfort and looking alarmed. "He's obsessed with the guy that's sitting a couple of tables back. Couldn't take his eyes off of him, I swear. Thought he was gonna try to console the guy for a minute. Dude was just sitting there crying, and this freak's over here looking at..." The bald, sweaty head began to surface behind Selena, and when I shouted for her to look out, the whole restaurant went dead silent. Jim and Selena turned to look, but there was nothing behind them. I'd had enough, though. I pushed Mark and Frank out of the way, freeing myself from the booth as I went to go check under the table behind us. He'd be crouching down there, grinning like the little goblin that he was. But as I got down on my knees and looked beneath, I was greeted by nothing but an empty space. The waitress asked me what I was looking for as I moved to look under his table as well, but by then I was already intent on leaving. I got in my car, threw the keys in the ignition, and sped off as fast as I could. Sitting at home now, I can't get that image out of my head. My phone's been blowing up, and I know my friends are worried. I can't make sense of it. What was that thing? Why did it take such an interest in me? Is it dangerous? Did it follow me home? Every time I close my eyes, I see those repulsive needle-like teeth and the no-color slits looking back at me. Every time I close my eyes, I wonder if I'll ever be able to see anything. Every time I close my eyes, I wonder if I'll ever be able to see anything but that creature again.
I've been an artist for a few years now. I went to school with people whose understanding of art stopped at watercolors and still lifes, but those never really were my thing. I like to be experimental in my work, really push the boundaries of art. My high school art teacher, Mr. Caff, never really understood that, but it's probably hard to understand much of anything with your head firmly crammed up your backside. He was one of those types who thought the Renaissance was the birth and death of the artistic expression, and that digital art was tantamount to blasphemy. He did not tolerate modern art in his classroom, and I likely wouldn't still be doing art if it wasn't for Terry. Terry and I met in art class freshman year, and we've been friends ever since. Terry is your textbook manic pixie dream girl, and her artistic medium is pop art with a soft spot for comics. She did all those reimaginings of classic comic covers, always in heavy oils and deep, saturated colors, and her work is really something to behold. Mr. Caff may not have understood her medium, but he understood her process, so she made straight B's in his class. I have a theory that he was trying to get into her ripped blue jeans, but manic pixie dream girls rarely fall for the middle-aged high school teacher, so tough break, Teach. The old bastard tried to fail me, on the other hand, but I rose above it, and now I'm one of the most well-known modern artists in the city, likely to his chagrin. My art is far from what you'd consider classical. I make sculptures from various mediums, do charcoal prints, weird displays of paints and acrylics, and recently I've begun doing metalwork sculptures in something I'm calling transitory mundane. The basic premise is that you take something normal, a refrigerator or a couch or a TV, and make it utterly mind-blowing. My horror fridge took first place at last year's fall gala, and my TV apocalypse made the paper earlier this year. This time, however, I've got something really interesting in mind. Terry raised an eyebrow as I pulled the cover off my latest art project. I call it the Infinity Table. Terry looked dubiously at the rectangular living room table, a thick piece of glass sitting propped over a dark opening. It just looks like a regular table to me. I'm not sure what kind of concept you're going for, but I don't get it. I grinned as I leaned down, flicking a switch as the inside lit up to reveal the trick. Through mirror placement and strategic lighting, the inside of the table resembles nothing so much as a black pit that proceeds downward into infinity. A ladder was installed on the side and seemed to descend down into the pit. The mirror magnified it on and into the void. Terry's jaw dropped open as she oohed appreciatively over the illusion. The rocks on the walls and the crystal lighting, a really nice touch if I do say so myself. That is so cool! It's so simple yet intriguing. Everyone's going to want one after the show next week. But only one of them will get it. I think this may be my greatest art piece yet. The two of us cackled over my brilliance, and Terry told me about the panel series she planned to do for her own entry. Terry had been hard at work on an original comic series, so tired of bringing others' works to life and not getting to work on her own stuff. She was debuting a series of oil paintings from her own personal collection, and she hoped they would drum up some interest for upcoming series. I was listening, really I was, but my eyes kept being drawn back down to that yawning chasm that lay in the center of the table. It was an illusion. I knew it was an illusion. I had made it after all, but I couldn't keep myself from feeling the sightless black eye as it stared at me. It had discomforted me before, the way a scary movie makes you shiver even after it's over, but I always managed to shrug it off. I had created the illusion. I knew it wasn't real, but I could still swear that something lurked within it. I knew it didn't, but it still intrigued me. I was like a bird that knows the bag will trap him, but still wants to know what lies inside. Like a man who knows that the void stares back, but goes right on staring. Hello? Are you even listening to me? I shook myself back and apologized for spacing out. I flipped the light out on the table, and it was once again reduced to a black crater. Even turned off, I still felt like I could feel that inky mass looking at me, and I didn't like the crawling, scrabbling way it seemed to contemplate me. It had never looked at me like this during its creation, and it seemed to have gained a life of its own with its completion. It's cool and all, but I'm kinda glad you turned it off. I looked up as Terry shuddered, and the discomfort was an alien concept on her normally whimsical face. It scares me a little bit. I smiled, but I knew all too well what she meant. That's why Terry was my best friend. It was sometimes like we shared a brain. How did you even come up with something like this? She asked, still sounding equal parts terrified and amazed. I started to rattle off something about pure talent or the muse at work, but I honestly couldn't remember how I had thought of it. Had it been in a dream? It seemed like I had been inspired by something to build this piece, but I couldn't remember what. I had been so driven the last few weeks to finish it that I never really stopped to think why. Hello, you spacing out on me again? Terry laughed, snapping her fingers in front of my face. I shook my head, getting a grip before answering. Just the muse at work, I guess. I took her out for drinks then, wanting to forget about the feeling that dark eye had given me as much as she did, but it was never far from my mind. When I stumbled back that night, the few drinks turning into a few too many drinks, I stood over the table and looked down into the dark, unlit eye. Even drunk, I felt the regard of that hateful space, and it sobered me a little. I could feel it staring at me through the flimsy haze that lay between us, and the dark hole seemed to long for its freedom again. I reached for the switch with a shaky hand, the mechanism snapping crisply as it came to life. The light came on, but it was cold comfort. The hole stretched into the earth, a dark and gaping maw that filled me with dread. Why had I created this thing? How did it occur to me to make such a hateful portal? How had I conceptualized this? The longer I looked into it, the more certain I became that I could see something at the bottom. It seemed to move within the dark eye, with frantic, herky-jerky movements. It moved like something in a claymation cartoon, and its regard was like wasps crawling on my skin. I didn't know what it was, couldn't even tell you how big it was, but as my hands trembled back towards the switch, I saw one thing for sure. It had begun to climb the ladder. The light snapped off with a smart pop, and I was left once more with only the dark haze across the glass. I went to bed, but my dreams were plagued by that bottomless eye and that thing that moved within. I didn't turn it on again until the day of the show. I honestly debated just pushing it into an alley behind my apartment and forgetting it ever existed, but I had too much time and money invested in the project to just walk away. The components hadn't come without a cost, and the prize money, not to mention the money I would make once it was sold, would allow me to do art for another few months. If it flopped at the show, I might have to actually find a job, and that would be the biggest blow to the art community imaginable. So I loaded it into the back of my ratty old pickup, the camper allowing it to ride in relative safety, and drove it to the gallery. I had secured it with a rope, not wanting it to tip over and break, despite my misgivings. I could tell myself that I kept checking the rear view the whole time just to make sure it wasn't getting damaged, but that was a lie. I wanted to make sure that nothing simply climbed out of it as I drove through the crowded streets of Seattle to what I hoped would be a feather in the cap of my career. My neighbor had helped me load the table. Beefy neighbors have to be good for something, right? And thankfully there were burly men in black security shirts to help me unload it. They did most of the unloading and reloading onto the hand dolly too, which was good because it had taken everything I had to put my hands on it as we loaded it into the truck. It had sat like a revered monolith in my living room for the past week. After I had woken up that first morning to a hangover and the sunlight illuminating the pit under that all-too-thin pane of glass, I had covered it with a tarp. I hadn't touched it, hadn't sat anything on it, hadn't even let my feet lean against it the whole week, and the thought of its surface against my skin made me feel crawly. I couldn't remember why I had been so excited about this thing, and only a feeling of deep revulsion filled me when I looked at it. If no one bought it, I had decided I would donate it to the gallery after the show. At least I could write that off on my taxes. Terry waved at me as she saw me coming in, and her little bird arms seemed ready to pop as she wrapped them around me. "I see you didn't get rid of it," she said with a smile, though her voice sounded strained. Terry wouldn't say so, but she seemed to feel the same trepidation I felt around the piece. I figured that someone would buy it, and who knows, the judges might really like it. She showed me her prints, scenes of dramatic heroes poised for battle, and spiraling cityscapes that oozed adventure, and I made the appropriate noises over them. It was always impressive what she could do with oils and paints, but tonight she had really outdone herself. I gave her another hug, wishing her luck as I pushed my hateful table over to the area that had been designated for me. A passing pair of lost frat boys helped me get it off the dolly, and far too soon I was left alone with this blight upon the world. I didn't turn it on. I honestly didn't really want to look at it, and I just contented myself to stand there as people bustled by and set up their own pieces for the show. 20 minutes later, my mind wandering, someone called my name, and I turned to find a stern-faced woman looking down at my piece. "What is it?" she asked, a ribbon on her shirt letting me know that, though she wasn't a judge, she was still very important. The ribbon let everyone know that she was a contributor, the color putting her in a high tier. "It's called an infinity table," I told her, her scowl not impressed. I reached down, my fingers trembling, and flipped the switch. I expected to see an angry something looking back at me, the glass bearing long cracks where something had battered it from the other side. But instead, it was just the same dark eye as always. It regarded the two of us with an unfriendly familiarity, and the stern-looking woman looked impressed as she took it all in. Very interesting. Not my style, but very interesting. You should leave it on if you want anyone to buy it. The endless tunnel is a definite selling point. I waited for her to move away before switching it off again. She had a point. If I wanted to get rid of this hateful thing, I needed people to see what it could do. The fear of something climbing out of it seemed silly now, as all these people stood around me, but it was a silly feeling that wouldn't abate. In the end, my greed overrode my fear, and I flipped it on so I could draw in some interest. Interest I found. People came over to have a look, and there was a fair amount of oohing and awing. They asked how I had done it, wanted one of their own, but I told them it was a one-of-a-kind piece and would likely carry a steep price tag. All the while, my eyes kept flitting back to the crevice in the center of the table, as though I expected to see something crawl up from the depths. I could see, or at least I imagined I could see, the stunted figure as he stalked about at the bottom of the pit. It was trapped there. This was its prison, and now I had given it a means of escape. I had invited it out of the pit, and now it could come into our world, and wow, how did you ever come up with something so cool? I started. Someone new had come up to ask about the infinity table, and I told them again about the concept. It all sounded so false to me now. I hadn't come up with the concept, though I could certainly talk about it in an educated manner. What a smart little bird I was. I could talk oh so prettily about my new project, using all the right buzzwords and trendy lingo to catch all these yuppies' attention. I was an artist. I created art, but I was beginning to feel like something else. This was beginning to feel like I was being used. Despite these misgivings, the show was going pretty well. People loved the infinity table. They thought it was really cool and a great perspective piece. I had a few tentative offers, but nothing serious. I would have probably taken the first offer, but the hole in the table kept distracting me. As I talked to people, I could see the small something beginning to climb the ladder again. It was still very small, like a fly crawling on a window pane, but as it climbed, it got larger and larger with each rung it grabbed. There was no way this could be real. I had built the thing. There was no hole in the void. It was all an optical illusion. Even so, the small creature was climbing up and up and up as these stupid airheads talked on and on about how much they loved my table. Hey, you okay? I jumped, realizing I'd been staring at the table for nearly 5 minutes. Terry was there, a well-dressed man grinning on her arm. Terry wasn't tall, but this guy looked like he might have had some hobbits in his family tree. He was short, hairy, dressed in a luxury white suit with a gold chain and a lot of very aggressive chest hair. I wasn't certain I could smell him. There were a lot of sweaty bodies, mine chief among them, but there was a definite tang of musky cologne and fragrant soap. Terry was smiling, but the smile looked paper-thin as the man, whom I was already calling Leisure Suit Larry in my head, rubbed his arm against her hip. "This is Clive," she said, indicating Larry as she slid herself free of him. "He liked my art so much that he decided to buy all 5 pieces. I just knew he had to see your infinity table, so I brought him over here to have a look." Translation, Leisure Suit Larry was Loaded Larry, and she was hoping she could solve both our problems. Larry had sized me up as she spoke, and I could feel my skin crawl under his less than altruistic stare. "I consider myself a lover of art, amongst other things. Did you make this?" he asked, looking down into the table as his eyes seemed to dazzle as they took in the sight of the gaping pit. "I did," I began, but before I could say anything else, I looked down at the table and felt my throat constrict. He was bigger now, the size of a thumbprint, and climbing fast. He was speeding up, climbing rapidly, and I wasn't sure how the others couldn't see him. Did they not see the shadowy little creature as it grew from a thumbprint to the size of a silver dollar? Larry was saying something, complimenting my work, but all I could focus on was the growing spot of black as it climbed like a mad thing. "I'm sold, love," he said to Terry, the word love making her flinch. "I'll pay you 30,000 for it." I couldn't speak. My throat was a stupid machine, incapable of doing anything but killing me slowly. The thing was twice as large now, growing quickly. I had no clue what I would do if it got to the glass and just started banging on that thin sheet of tempered material. Larry was looking right at it, his nose inches from the tabletop. How could he not see it? Playing hard to get, huh? Okay, 40,000 then. I could make out the top of its head, its face turned up to look at the land above. Its eyes were like twin coals, its mouth open in a leering grin, and its hands were covered in hair or tar or something. Its body was like an undiluted shadow, a golem of darkness that was climbing like a fiend to get at the lighted world above. It seemed like I might have unintentionally created performance art, I thought with a weak little gasp. Escape from purgatory in real life. Terry slid her hand into mine and squeezed, bringing me out of my panic. "What's wrong?" she whispered, seeing my face and sensing my fear. "You're a tease, aren't you?" Larry said, looking up from the table coyly. "Fine, but 50,000 is as high as I'll go unless you agree to have drinks with me after the show. Then I might be willing to go up to 60. "Sold," I squeaked out, afraid he would take it all back and leave me with this thing. He extended a hand over the table. As I shook it, I could see the creature's face coming closer and closer to the top. I pumped his arm twice before bending down to snap the light off. Can you take it now?" I asked him, my voice sounding frantic even to my own ears. "Don't you want the judges to see it?" Terry asked, a little confused. The panel of 3 judges were just coming to the display area, but I didn't want this thing close to me for more than a second. The hell with the judges. The fear inside me was like a starving weasel, and I feared it would burst through my chest any minute. "Can you?" I asked again, looming over him. He nodded dumbly, taking out his checkbook and scrawling out a business check. I took it, and he pulled out his cell phone as he made some calls. He excused himself, and before Terry could ask any more questions, I pocketed the check and left the gallery. I met her later for drinks, and she said Larry had excused himself after the purchase. He said he wanted to get it loaded and set up in his own exhibition right away. I think you scared him with your intensity a little. We laughed about it then, my soul lighter now that I didn't have to look at that hateful table anymore. I hadn't thought about that table until yesterday, about a week and a half after the gala. The check had been cashed, and the money had easily floated my art career for the next few years. I'd paid some bills, paid my outstanding credit card debt, and began living pretty comfortably off the excess. I was sitting on my couch, watching Netflix and eating a bowl of cereal for dinner, when my phone buzzed. It was Terry. She had sent me a news article along with a message telling me that I should watch it. "Your art piece just made the news in New York," she told me, and the lack of emojis and lols made me a little wary. I opened it up to find an article about a murder at the gallery of Clive Foreman. The proprietor, Mr. Foreman, had been found dead in his gallery in Soho Tuesday morning. He appeared to have been drowned, though no water could be found in his lungs or on the ground around him. Doctors say it's as though he simply drowned on the floor of his gallery and was left there. The next picture was of a very familiar table. It had been broken, and the glass lay gaping and jagged like an untreated wound. The article went on to say that the murderer had left a message on the wall in either tar or some kind of oil, and as I scrolled to the next picture, I felt the phone slip out of my numb hand. The message on the wall seemed to glower at me from the floor, and I drew my knees up to my chest as I tried to make myself stop hyperventilating. It read, "Your muse is free. My prison is no more." Good evening, everyone. It's me, Dr. Plague. Thank you so much for joining me for tonight's story. If you're not familiar with the Infinity Table, I definitely suggest you go look it up. It's something to see, and it definitely helped me write this story. I've always been a big fan of optical illusions like that, and there's just something a little unsettling about it if you stare at it for too long. Before we go, let's go ahead and thank our sponsors. Thanks to Leslie Lou Riddle and Janet for being our Spooky Skeleton tier contributors. Thanks to Xaronan for being our Ghost Rider tier contributor. And thanks to Glenn Jenkins for being our Ghost Reader tier contributor. Thanks, everybody. We just couldn't do it without you. If you too would like to support the show, come on down to Patreon. For just $5 a month, you too can have your name read out at the end of every TikTok and every YouTube video I do. Contributors also get their videos a day early, so if any of my patrons are listening to this, they're probably listening to it on Thursday as opposed to Friday. So, what are you waiting for? Come on down to Patreon and join the club. And as always, thanks for stopping by. Dr. Plague, signing off. Have a wonderful evening. I've been looking at those lights every day since I took the job. I work overnight at one of those big warehouses. It's not an Amazon warehouse, but it's similar. They do a lot of off-brand furniture and things, and me and a couple of other guys work overnight loading trucks. It's not glamorous, but it keeps me fed and my bills paid. It's a 10 to 6 kind of gig. You bring your lunch and eat during one of your smoke breaks, but as long as the trucks are loaded by morning, the bosses don't really care. All that preamble was to tell you that the lights are something I've wondered about since the first night I came to the warehouse. It wasn't much, just a little string of lights in the woods beyond the road, but it took my attention off the playlist I was listening to. It was beyond some trees, maybe 100 feet into the woods, but I wondered what could be back there. Was it someone's workshop? Was it some housing development? Weirder still, maybe it was a government facility or some kind of haunted wooded area. I thought about it all shift and caught myself looking at the woods on the way home, though I couldn't see the lights in the daytime, of course. I dreamed about them that night. I didn't know what the lights were, but I dreamed they were twinkling in the woods as I sat beside the roadside. It reminded me of the lights on my light bright from when I was a kid. Sometimes I would set up the paper and just fill it with the white bulbs and pretend it was a field of fireflies, the ones that came in the spring and summer. I would sit on the back porch for hours when I was a kid and watch them until my mom made me come inside. That's what they looked like to me. And the longer I looked, the more they danced. That night, as I drove past the lights again, I resolved to ask somebody about it. "What do you guys know about those lights in the woods?" I asked, the three of us sorting and loading boxes into tonight's truck. Andre and Kevin looked at each other, pausing for a moment in our nightly drudgery. "The lights along 45 East?" Kevin asked, clearly hoping I was talking about something else. "Yeah," I said. "Why, are there more lights?" Andre laughed, but it sounded forced. "Oh, that ain't nothing. It's just some lights out in the woods. Nothing to worry about." We loaded a little more cheap furniture as I chewed it over, but I still found myself curious about those lights. "But what is it?" I asked again, and the two of them sighed. "It's nothing," Kevin said. "Don't worry about it," Andre said, but they clearly knew more than they were saying. "What's the big deal?" I asked. Why don't you just tell me?" "Because it's nothing," Kevin said, wincing as he dropped the box he was carrying. "And you shouldn't be looking for nothing," Andre added, his face looking like maybe he had said too much. I didn't bring it up again after that, but it was never far from my mind. For 3 weeks, I watched those lights, and then I dreamed about them every morning as I slept like the dead. Then, one night, as I drove past the lights, I couldn't hold my curiosity anymore. I'd driven by an access road that I believed would take me to the lights for nearly a month, and that night, the call was just too great. There was no guard post, no fence, no barbed wire, no nothing, and I figured it couldn't be dangerous if they weren't trying to protect it. So instead of driving to work, I turned down the access road and drove into the woods. Stupid, I know, but I had to know. If it really was a forest full of fireflies or just some redneck solar lights, I suddenly had to know. When I drove under a sign that sat high above the road, I had to back up and read it. "Serene Meadows," read the sign. "A charming community." I was standing in the road, trying to read it in the headlights of my car, when my phone rang. It was Andre, and I killed the engine and sat in the car as I picked it up. He wanted to know where I was and why I wasn't here to unload boxes, and without much thought, I put on my best hoarse, sore throat voice that I could manage. I had only planned to have a quick look, but now I needed to know more. "Shit, sorry, Andre. just woke up. I've got some kind of crud, man. It's laid me out today. I just need a day, man. I want to shake this off so I don't bring it to work. He was quiet for a moment, and I got the feeling he was listening to something. You sure you're at home? I blinked at the phone. Andre had never been suspicious of anything and didn't even really want to know why we were loading trucks in a warehouse in the middle of the woods. But he sounded different today. It sounded like he was trying to catch me in a lie, and it almost made me want to come clean with him. Almost, but not quite. Of course I am, I said, cobbling up a cough. I just want to go back to bed, man. I feel terrible. Okay, well, feel better. See you tomorrow night. Yeah, of course, I told him. When I hung up, I actually sighed in relief. It felt like I had dodged something big, or like I hadn't been caught doing something I shouldn't be doing. I could see the lights getting bigger as I drove up the cracked and unmaintained road. No more than 10 minutes later, I pulled up into a very normal-looking cul-de-sac. Each house, and there were 7, was a different color. There was a blue one, a yellow one, a purple one, a red one, a white one, a green one, and a black one. And in front of each house was a blazing streetlight. Each house was a 2-story, with a large front and backyard and a picket fence around the front of each. They were well maintained, the concrete of the road too, and it was strange to see something like this in the middle of the woods. This was what I'd been seeing all this time, a perfect little community, not that far from the road. As I parked and walked around the neighborhood, I expected to be stopped by somebody. The lights were on in the houses, and I figured someone would come to see what I was doing here. There were no cars in the driveways, though, not even so much as an ATV in the shed. And when I peeked in the windows of the yellow house, I saw it was as empty as can be. All of them appeared that way. The lights were on, but no one was home. It was the strangest thing, just an abandoned subdivision left in the woods. But the longer I stayed, the less alone I started to feel. There was something about the encroaching woods around the houses, the way the trees leaned in, the way the shadows moved in the underbrush. I never felt in danger, but I did feel watched. It was like seeing shadows move for just a fraction of a second, and then slink away before I could get a good look. I finally got up the courage to try the door on one of the houses, after knocking for about 10 minutes straight, but it was locked. All of them were, it seemed, except the black house. I didn't really want to go into the black house. It seemed ominous somehow, but I did, and it was just like the rest of them. TV sitting off as it sat before the couch, kitchen in order, except the fridge was empty, and a dining room set for a meal. The upstairs had 2 small bedrooms and a large master bedroom with a bathroom. The bathrooms, one downstairs and 2 upstairs, were fully furnished, and the beds were made and ready for new owners. The whole place was a little freaky, but I kind of felt like the house had been waiting for me somehow. I know how that sounds, but I felt like I was supposed to be here, you know? And when I came back downstairs, I checked my watch and realized that I'd been exploring for 4 hours. It was pushing 10:30, and I supposed I should bail. There's probably some lazy security guard that would be by around midnight to catch me here. But as I drove out of the cul-de-sac, I couldn't help but feel a pang of loss. It was like leaving home, and I desperately wanted to turn around and go back. I had inadvertently given myself a 3-day weekend with my call-out, and when I got home, I stayed up playing games a little bit before heading to bed. I dreamed about the little community that night, just as I had dreamed about the lights before that. But this time, the dreams were different. I was standing in the master bedroom of the black house, looking down at the street as the streetlights burned brightly. As if on cue, the doors to the other houses banged open, and a parade of shadowy people came spilling out. They exited the houses in long columns, and as they approached the middle of the cul-de-sac, they congregated there, filling the street. The streetlights brightened, their almost eye-watering light becoming even brighter. There was a crackle of electricity, and all the shadow people were suddenly gone. I woke up then, gasping for breath, and wondered what the hell that had been. I went back to Serene Meadows that day, dreams be damned, and by daylight the place seemed very different. The cul-de-sac was pitted and cracked, the road nearly gone from the grass. The houses were still there, but they were peeling, and the windows were mostly broken or dusty. The doors were splintered, and most of them had been kicked in, but it was the street lights that seemed the saddest. The glass was broken, the lights shattered or missing, and the whole place looked like the woods would reclaim them at any time. I was perplexed. It was like a tornado had been through here, and a search of the houses found nothing but gutted rooms and graffiti everywhere. It looked like homeless people might have discovered the place way before I did, and I was glad I had worn boots. There were needles and cans scattered around, as well as a few blanket mounds and sleeping bags, but I didn't find anyone there. Whoever had been living there was long gone. I didn't know what had happened to the place. It had been fully intact the night before, and as the sun set, I got in my car and headed home. Looked like the kind of place I definitely didn't want to be after dark. The sun was dropping as I got back on the road, careful not to be seen by Andre or Kevin if they were heading to work. But as night settled over the woods, I saw the lights again and stopped abruptly in the middle of the road. I stared, not caring if anybody came along to beep at me. I'd seen the place. There couldn't be any lights coming from there. The houses looked gutted, the copper wire probably the first thing to go, and the streetlights were broken and shattered. Still, something made me turn around in the road and drive back to see who the lights belonged to. What I found was the same little community that I'd seen the night before. 7 perfect houses around a cul-de-sac, the streetlights burning bright and the road well maintained. As I sat there marveling at them, though, that was when I saw the first of the figures. With the lights on, they were hard to miss, perfect shadow people, looking down on me from the windows of the upper floors. There were just a few of them at first, but the longer I watched, the more they piled up. Some houses only had a few, but others had dozens. As they began to fill the bottom windows too, I put my car in reverse and got out of there. I didn't know what was going on, but I didn't want to be seen by those things or find out what they would do to me. I drove like a bat out of hell, and when I got home, I felt like I'd run a marathon. I went to bed in my room, but the dreams seemed to be waiting for me. This time I was standing in the road. The lights were flaring, and the doors opened as they came spilling out. I was suddenly surrounded by a sea of shadow people. They were whispering something, whispering my name, and as they gathered around me, I saw the streetlights flare. I woke up to find I wasn't in my room anymore. I was on the bare wooden floor, the sunlight spilling through the broken windows of the black house. I was in the master bedroom of the black house, and by the daylight, it looked rougher than even I remembered it. I didn't know how I'd gotten there, but I knew an Uber wasn't going to come get me this far out. I'd have to walk the 7 or 8 miles back to town. If I wanted to get there before lunchtime, then I better get going. The way up the access road felt like it took years, and as I made my way to the highway, I sighed and started hoofing it. When a car pulled over to the shoulder, I wasn't surprised to discover that Andre was behind the wheel. "Looks like you're feeling better," he said, reaching over to pop the passenger side door open. "Climb in, bud. Let's talk." As we drove, Andre asked me if I had been to Serene Meadows. I couldn't lie, not as I was walking up the side of the road, so I told him that I had been. He nodded, said that he'd been afraid of that, and pulled into the parking lot of this little diner off the interstate exit. We got a booth, ordered food, and he told me what he hadn't wanted to tell me back in the truck when we were loading boxes for the day. "I've been there too," Andre said, sipping coffee. "Everyone who sees the lights has to go have a look. I saw it, but I'm guessing you've seen more than I have. I saw this pristine little development in the woods and turned back around as quickly as I could. I didn't want to get shot. This is the South, and a fella of my ethnicity who's skulking around after dark is likely to get a bullet in the head and a how do you do later. B," he paused, sipping more coffee, "I saw the shadow people, and that sealed it for me. It was just a glance, nothing more, but that was enough for me. I've been loading trucks out there for about 5 years. Did you know that? It's decent work, and the pay's pretty good. In that time, I've seen people come and go, and usually it has something to do with those lights. Some of them just stop showing up. Some of them go crazy thinking about it. But it's like a drug when you get right down to it. You stop it for good, you stop giving it your attention, and eventually you kick it. That's how it was for Kevin, and that's how it'll be for you, too." I choked on my coffee. "Kevin seen this, too?" Andre nodded. "Yep. He and I had a similar talk. Saw him walking up the roadside one morning after calling out from work. Asked him if he'd been to Serene Meadows, and he told me he'd been exploring, just like you." Did he wake up there after the dreams?" I asked. And Andre nodded again. "He didn't know how, but he woke up in one of those houses. Said he had dreamed about the shadow people. The house, as I think you know, only appears at night. By day, they just look like trash houses, but at night, it's the best little community in the woods. They look comfy at night, but I'll warn you flatly not to spend time there. I've known more than a few people who gave in to its call and simply disappeared altogether. One of them, a guy named Russell, told me he was living in the yellow house, the very same one Kevin woke up in." I looked at him shocked. "He was living there? It's a squatter's shack. Why would he do that?" Andre shrugged. He said that if he was going to keep waking up there, then he might as well start staying there. He was tired of the walk of shame afterward, and Andre shook his head, trying to find the best way to tell it. He said that the longer he stayed there, the more it resembled the house he saw by night. He said he saw the midnight procession as the shadow people went to the bright lights, and he said he heard them whisper to him as well. "What were they whispering?" I asked, not really wanting to know, but needing to know. "They were whispering for him," Andre said, "and then one night, he just never showed up for work. I knew where he was, but I didn't go looking for him. He was gone, just like you'll be gone if you let that place eat you up. Do yourself a favor and leave it alone. Drink yourself to sleep tonight. Take a sleeping pill if you don't like to drink, but try not to think about that place. If you wake up there, just leave as fast as you can and call me. I'll come get you. If not me, Kevin will. If you can't do that, just come stay at my place for a few nights. I'll watch over you, like I did for Kevin, and we'll get you through this. You seem like a nice kid, but if you persist with this, then it will eat you up. Believe it." I agreed to crash at Andre's for a few nights, but I can't stop wondering where I'll wake up tomorrow morning. Even though it scares me, I can't stop thinking about that little community in the woods. What happened there to make it like this? What darkness lurks through there that makes even the homeless and the desperate leave it be? Most of all, I wonder if those shadow people are the people who tried to stay and were never seen again. As curious as I am, I hope I never find out. Knowing might be a great way to join that congregation one fateful night.
It's less of a memory and more of a hazy sort of dream. I dream it so often that I have to believe it's real, and it never ceases to wake me in a state of terror. I'm standing on my grandparents' cracked carport, their old Ford Aerostar parked on it as it makes twin walkways to the door that leads inside. At first I thought I was sitting or walking on my knees, but then I realized I'm just very small. This must have happened when I was younger, 2 or 3 maybe, and my steps are a little unsteady as I toddle along. I can see the normal collection of carport junk as it slides by my field of vision. An old bike, a leaf blower, some lawn chairs, and I seem to be making my way towards a large rusty grill that's near the back of the carport. I can almost feel the sleek surface of that van as I slide my fingers along it. I was drawing pictures in the road dirt, the mud and dust that cling to a vehicle, and I was making little waves with my finger as I walked along. I turned to draw a dolphin as he jumped out of the water, his mouth open and smiling, and that was when I saw it. It crawled from under the front of the van, slow and deliberate, and I turned my head as it came into my peripherals. The spider looks absolutely massive to me. It's roughly the size of a human hand, and it's stretched out and looking at me as if it can't believe it's seen me either. He wiggles his pincers at me, and I felt a shiver run through me as I felt his regard. I feel a sense of dread that has no place in a child that young. Even then, I knew that I didn't want this thing to come near me. I had a real case of arachnophobia when I was younger, and I think this might have been what started it. I didn't like rubber spiders, pipe cleaners that form the shape of spiders, or anything that was even vaguely spider-shaped. I would have rather cut my hand off than hold a living spider, and even just seeing a plastic one or a picture of a spider in a book was enough to make my skin crawl. I remember this one taking a step toward me, and I took a step back from it as that feeling of fear spread through me. It was deliciously invasive, a feeling I would later chase through haunted houses and dark movie theaters. But with all the life experience that a 2 or 3-year-old can have, it was something I didn't like. It made me think of the sounds I sometimes heard in the closet, under the bed, outside my bedroom window. Anywhere else, there might be a monster when the lights were out. It took another step, and then another, and then another, and I backed away on unsteady legs. I know now that it probably had no intention of hurting me. It was probably just curious. But in the dream, I am certain, with the logic only a child can hold, that this creature will end my life. The spider would bite me and put some devious poison into me. It would grow to towering heights and swallow me whole. It would wrap me up in a cocoon and drag me off so it could drain my blood, like the spiders did in my animal books, and 1,000 other terrible things. These are things that adults know are impossible, but children know not only can happen, but have happened 1,000 times before. I backpedaled in the dream, moving away as I kept my hands on the smooth surface of the van. But suddenly, disaster struck. I stumbled, falling backward onto my butt and hands, and I cry out as the pavement takes its toll on the flesh of my smooth, unblemished hand. I was momentarily distracted by the pain in my hand, and then I looked up as if suddenly remembering the spider. For a moment, I cannot see it, and that fills me with relief. It's moved off. It's gone after tastier prey, and now I can get away from the carport at a more leisurely pace. Then I twitch my foot to the side, and there it is, clicking its pincers menacingly as it stares at me. I cry out in fear, and then someone cries out behind me as they call my name. I'm momentarily startled, their voice echoing in the carport, and then I'm scooped up and pulled out of danger by strong, assuring hands. The spider is suddenly miles below me, a toy or a stain on the concrete instead of a threat. And as whoever has picked me up brings a large black house shoe down on the spider, it becomes an actual stain on the concrete. I always wake up as they babble nonsense to me, and no matter how many times I have the dream, it never makes much sense. So the last time I was at my grandmother's house, I asked her about it. She just laughed. God, I'm surprised you can remember that far back. Yeah, it happened right out there on the carport. You were playing outside while I gardened, and I saw you toddle into the carport and didn't think anything of it. You've never hurt yourself out there before, so I figured I'd just let you play. When you yelled, I came on the run to see what had happened. You were sitting there, crying, and right by your foot was the biggest wolf spider I've ever seen. He was no tarantula, but he could have definitely bit you and made it hurt. My protective nature kicked in, and I stomped him before I could even think about it. I usually leave them alone. It's bad luck to kill a spider, but this one had menaced my grandbaby, and I couldn't have that. It was kind of weird to realize that a dream I'd had for years and years was something that had actually happened. Makes me wonder if I've had other dreams that might be real as well.